The story of walls is as old as civilization itself. They have been built to protect, to divide, to symbolize strength, and sometimes to embody fear. But few walls in history have carried the weight of such political, social, and emotional meaning as the Berlin Wall. Its rise in 1961 carved not just a city in two, but split families, friendships, and lives across a physical barrier of concrete and barbed wire. For nearly 3 decades, it stood as one of the starkest symbols of the Cold War, a boundary not just of geography, but of ideology. And then, almost overnight, in November 1989, it fell, not with the roar of armies, but with the cries of ordinary people, the sound of hammers and chisels striking at its cemented heart. This was more than the collapse of a wall, it was the unraveling of a global era. Hello and welcome to the Other Side Stories. Here, we travel beyond the usual headlines to explore the untold tales of world history, mysteries, turning points, and hidden connections that shaped our planet. If you love discovering how the past still echoes in our present, you're in the right place. Let's uncover the other side of history together. To truly understand the fall of the Berlin Wall, we must begin long before that November night in 1989. The wall's existence was the physical manifestation of deeper global tensions. At the close of World War II in 1945, Germany was a devastated landscape of rubble and exhaustion. The victorious Allied powers, the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and later France, had promised to liberate Europe from tyranny. But in victory, they found themselves divided in vision. What should happen to Germany, to Berlin, its capital, deep inside the Soviet occupation zone? The Potsdam Conference in July 1945 gave the world a glimpse of the fissures between East and West. Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones, and Berlin, though lying squarely in the Soviet sector, was also partitioned. The seeds of future confrontation had been planted. At first, the city remained relatively open. Berliners could move between sectors. But as Soviet leader Joseph Stalin consolidated his grip over Eastern Europe, cracks widened. Ideologies of capitalism and communism clashed, not only in speeches, but in policies, economies, and military posturing. The Berlin blockade of 1948 was an early harbinger of the Cold War. Stalin sought to choke West Berlin by cutting off all land routes, forcing the Allies to surrender the city. Instead, the United States and its allies launched the Berlin Airlift, supplying West Berlin entirely by air for nearly a year. More than 2 million tons of food, fuel, and supplies were flown in, proving both the West's commitment and the city's symbolic significance. By the time the blockade was lifted in 1949, Germany's division was no longer temporary. It was the reality. Out of this crisis came 2 German states, the Federal Republic of Germany in the west, backed by the Allies, and the German Democratic Republic in the east, under Soviet influence. West Germany embraced a capitalist market economy and eventually joined NATO. East Germany became one of the strongest Soviet satellites, its socialist system tightly controlled by the ruling Socialist Unity Party. Berlin, however, remained an anomaly, an island of Western democracy and capitalism inside a communist state. This anomaly became intolerable for East Germany. Throughout the 1950s, millions of East Germans voted with their feet, escaping to the West through Berlin. It was the one escape route that remained open, a loophole in the Iron Curtain that stretched across Europe. By 1961, approximately 3 million people had fled the East, many of them young professionals, doctors, engineers, those whom the state could least afford to lose. This brain drain threatened the East German economy and embarrassed its leadership. Something had to be done. On the night of August 12, 1961, East German troops, under orders from leader Walter Ulbricht and backed by Moscow, rolled out barbed wire and barriers across Berlin. Streets were torn up, railways cut, families separated overnight. Within days, concrete slabs replaced wire. Watchtowers, guard dogs, and armed soldiers ensured that the line was sealed. The Berlin Wall was born. For the people of Berlin, it was more than concrete. It was heartbreak. Sons and daughters could no longer visit their parents. Couples were separated. Friends found themselves suddenly in different worlds, unable to cross a barrier patrolled by men with orders to shoot. The wall sliced through neighborhoods, through streets, even through cemeteries. It was called the anti-fascist protective rampart by the East, but to the world, it was the wall of shame. Throughout the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, the wall stood as a grim reality of division. Its surface became a canvas of defiance in the West, covered in graffiti, art, and slogans demanding freedom. On the East, however, it remained blank, gray, watched over by soldiers. Escape attempts continued, some daring and ingenious. Tunnels dug under the wall, hot air balloons floating above it, even hijacked trains. But many ended in tragedy. Hundreds were killed trying to cross. Thousands more were imprisoned for even attempting. Yet, history is never static. By the 1980s, cracks were forming, not in the concrete, but in the system that upheld it. The Soviet Union, under Mikhail Gorbachev, was struggling with economic stagnation and political reform. His policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika reverberated across the Eastern Bloc. In Poland, the Solidarity movement challenged communist rule. In Hungary, border controls began to loosen. Across Eastern Europe, people were beginning to demand change. East Germany, however, remained stubborn. Erich Honecker, its aging leader, resisted reforms, insisting socialism would outlast the century. But ordinary East Germans were growing restless. They gathered in churches, in streets, calling for freedom of travel, for democracy, for dignity. The Monday demonstrations in Leipzig became a weekly pulse of resistance, swelling from hundreds to tens of thousands. The world was watching. By 1989, the pressure was unbearable. On November 9th, in a press conference that would become one of the most fateful moments of the 20th century, East German spokesman Günter Schabowski, fumbling his notes, announced that East Berliners would be allowed to cross the border. When asked when, he muttered, "Immediately." Within hours, crowds surged toward the checkpoints. Border guards, confused and unprepared, opened the gates. What followed was a scene the world would never forget. Berliners climbed atop the wall, embracing, cheering, hammering at its concrete with whatever tools they could find. Strangers kissed, families reunited, songs rang out into the cold November night. Television screens across the globe broadcasted images of joy, disbelief, and liberation. The symbol of division had collapsed not by tanks, not by treaties, but by people. The fall of the Berlin Wall was not just the end of a barrier, it was the end of the Cold War order. Within a year, Germany reunited. Within 2 years, the Soviet Union itself dissolved. The wall's destruction became shorthand for freedom's triumph, for the idea that walls, no matter how high or thick, cannot stand forever against the will of people. But this story is layered with complexities: political maneuvering, human suffering, quiet heroism, and international drama. To truly appreciate its meaning, we need to dig deeper into the lives behind the headlines, the forgotten stories of those who lived in its shadow, and the global ripple effects it created. Let us step back again into Berlin, into the divided city of the 1960s, to explore how life evolved under the wall's shadow. On the western side, the city became a front line of the Cold War, heavily subsidized by the West to showcase prosperity. West Berliners lived with the constant reminder of isolation, surrounded on all sides by hostile territory, yet determined to thrive. Universities, theaters, and businesses flourished, supported by Western aid. The city became a beacon of freedom, a magnet for artists, intellectuals, and political leaders who wanted to show solidarity. On the eastern side, life was tightly controlled. The East German state security, the infamous Stasi, monitored every aspect of citizens' lives. Informants infiltrated communities, workplaces, even families. Fear was a constant companion. Yet, despite repression, people adapted. They went to work, raised children, listened to state-approved media, and occasionally whispered jokes about the regime in private. For young people in East Berlin, the wall was a daily reminder of both limitation and resilience. Western music and television signals still managed to slip across, offering glimpses of a different world: jeans, rock concerts, fast cars. The contrast between what they saw and what they lived only deepened the desire for change. Internationally, the wall was both a flashpoint and a bargaining chip. American presidents used it to define policy. John F. Kennedy in 1963 stood before the wall and declared, "Ich bin ein Berliner," aligning himself with the city's fate. Ronald Reagan in 1987 directly challenged Gorbachev to tear down this wall. These moments resonated globally, but within Berlin, the wall remained unmovable. Yet, history teaches us that unmovable things are rarely permanent. The wall's eventual collapse came as much from external pressures as from the courage of ordinary people who refused to remain silent. Each protest, each small act of defiance, was a crack in the structure. Each whispered prayer, each hidden leaflet carried more weight than the concrete slabs could withstand.